I have always been responsible, practical, the one who thinks everything through to the smallest detail before making a decision, the one who does not give in to emotions, but relies on logic, weighing the pros and cons. My name is Sophia, and the last 5 years of my life could outwardly be called successful. Stable work in a state-owned company, which, although it did not bring me joy, gave me confidence in the future, my own home, albeit a small but cozy apartment, sufficient income, allowing not only to provide for myself, but also to help others from time to time. However, over the years, I realized that success, as seen by others, is not at all equal to happiness, especially when it comes to family, the very family in which I always felt like a secondary, unnecessary shadow of my older sister. Sarah was their golden child, their pride, their joy, their source of endless admiration. She could afford anything, any mistakes, any whims, because her parents looked at her through rose-colored glasses of unconditional love. While I was studying, trying, making plans, and thinking about the future, Sarah sailed through life relying solely on her natural charm, a smile that melted everyone's hearts, and, of course, on our parents, who were ready to fulfill her every whim, even if it meant ignoring reality. Don't get me wrong, I loved my sister, but since childhood I have been aware of my place in this family hierarchy. Every second weekend, I return to my parents' house to visit them. It's become a ritual, a habit, something that I do without thinking too much, just because it's the way it's supposed to be, the way it's supposed to be, the way it's right. On Friday evening, as soon as I finish my day at work, I go to the nearest supermarket, choose some thoughtful, practical gifts that I think they will need, and then hit the road, knowing that I will spend the next 2 days in an atmosphere of strained family harmony, where I will have to pretend over and over again that it's okay that I don't notice the obvious, that I don't remember that damn wedding loan that changed everything. 7 years ago, Sarah announced that she was getting married, and, of course, her wedding was supposed to be grand, luxurious, the kind that all her friends and acquaintances would talk about. I immediately realized that her plans far exceeded the financial capabilities of our family, but at that time I was still hoping that maybe she would still show some common sense. I was wrong. I still vividly remember that evening when my parents announced to me that they were going to take out a loan to pay for her wedding. We were sitting in the kitchen, at a round table covered with the usual white tablecloth, and I stared at them in disbelief. "Mom, Dad, this is crazy," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, but my voice still betrayed my tension. Why doesn't Sarah take out a loan herself if she really wants a lavish wedding? Mom's face immediately tensed, and the expression I'd known since childhood appeared in her gaze, the mixture of annoyance and condemnation that always appeared when I asked uncomfortable questions. "Your sister has problems with her credit history, the banks won't let her." I gritted my teeth. "Sure. You bet. Then maybe she should scale back a little. To hold a wedding more modestly, within a real budget." I knew they would answer me, but I asked anyway. "Don't mind your own business, Sophia," Mom said sharply, her voice firm, unyielding. "It's an important day for your sister. Don't be selfish." Selfish. It's a word I've heard them use all my life every time I've tried to say something sensible. Her father sat next to her and nodded silently, as he always did when it came to Sarah. He never argued with his mother, never contradicted her decisions, especially when it came to their eldest daughter. I already knew how it would end, but I didn't even realize how bad it would be. Years later, when I came to my parents' house, I did my routine. I bought small gifts, brought groceries, helped with household chores, listened to my mother's endless stories about how wonderful Sarah was, smiled patiently, pretended that everything was fine, that I wasn't angry, I wasn't offended, I didn't feel like the only one who supports our family financially. But last Friday, everything changed. I drove up to my parents' house, just like I had been doing for the past few years, parked in my usual spot near the gate, turned off the engine, and paused for a few seconds before getting out of the car, clutching tightly the packages of small but thoughtful gifts that I had picked up for my parents, their favorite treats. Some of the useful little things for the house, Small tokens of attention that I brought every time to brighten up the gray days of Mom and Dad a little, so that they knew what I thought of them. Taking a deep breath, I opened the door and stepped into the house, completely not expecting that at that very moment my world would turn upside down. In the living room, in the very place where our old sofa used to stand, on which I once sat wrapped in a plaid, with a cup of hot tea in my hands, now sat Sarah, my older sister, the one who disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only a pile of unpaid debts and a gaping void, which has been filled with bitterness and resentment over the years. But the worst part wasn't that she was back, but that she wasn't alone. At her feet, playing with colorful cubes, sat two small children, a girl and a boy, very tiny, no older than 5 and 3 years old. The sight of them hit me like a massive blow to the chest, the kind that takes my breath away, because I didn't know anything about them, didn't even suspect their existence. Sarah, who had blocked me wherever possible, Sarah, who had not responded to any of my letters regarding the loan, Sarah, who had behaved as if I had ceased to exist, was now sitting in the living room of our family home, calmly fingering a lock of her blonde hair, as if nothing had happened. It was as if 5 years of silence had not passed, as if everything was the same as always. And our parents. They were shining. Their faces shone with such delight, such glee that my heart sank. They looked at her as if she were a prodigal daughter who had returned home after a long war, and not the person who had thrown them into a whirlpool of financial ruin and helplessness. "Oh, hi, Sophia," Sarah said casually, barely glancing at me, her voice so calm, so relaxed, that I almost shuddered. She didn't even try to get up to hug me or at least greet me properly. Instead, she just lazily shouted towards the kitchen, "Mom, I'm starving. Is my favorite dish ready?" I remained standing in the doorway, feeling the forgotten gift bags grow heavy in my hands, and watched my parents' faces soften at her demanding tone, as my mother, without saying a word, immediately rushed to the stove to set the table for her, as my father, smiling, threw admiring glances over and over again. Glancing at his suddenly appeared grandchildren, stroking their heads, as if he couldn't believe his luck. Some things never seemed to change, but I understood that others would change in the most unexpected ways, and the consequences of these changes would affect us all. The dinner was surreal. Mom was running around the kitchen, trying to cook as many of the dishes that Sarah always loved, while my gifts were left forgotten on the bedside table in the living room. Her father couldn't take his eyes off the children, watching them play, while Sarah just enjoyed being surrounded by the attention she always deserved. I looked at her and tried to realize that these children, these little people with chubby cheeks and infectious laughter, were my niece and nephew, my relatives, whom I didn't even know about. The bitterness rose in his throat like a sip of strong, too bitter coffee that could not be swallowed. At some point, I couldn't stand it anymore, and when we all sat down at the dining table, I broke the awkward silence that seemed to ring in the air between my sister and me. "What made you come back, Sarah?" She shrugged, not looking up from her plate, shoveling another piece of food into her mouth as if the question wasn't even worth her attention. "I just missed my mom and dad. That's all." Her voice was so casual, so indifferent, as if she hadn't left us all behind for 5 long years. I took a deep breath, feeling my fingers clench into fists under the table, before asking the next question that was on the tip of my tongue. "Does this mean that you're finally going to help pay off the loan they took out for your wedding?" The room became so quiet that I could almost hear the hand of the old wall clock above the cupboard continuing its slow course. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Sarah's face instantly turned red with annoyance, her eyes flashed with anger, but before she could say anything, her mother jumped up from her seat, her voice sounded unexpectedly harsh. "Sophia, this is not the time to talk about money." Her tone was judgmental, as it always was when I brought up uncomfortable topics. "Can't we just be happy that the family is finally back together?" "Is the family back together?" My stomach clenched. But what about those 5 years when I was the only one keeping my parents afloat? What about all those months when I regularly sent $1,500 each because they couldn't pay their bills? What about all the things I did so they could live normally after Sarah left them with that damn debt? But, of course, let's not talk about money. The rest of the weekend passed as if I were invisible. My parents spent every minute with Sarah and her children, showering them with attention and care, while I could have been a piece of furniture, static, inconspicuous, unnecessary. Just before I left on Sunday, I found Sarah alone in the kitchen. She was leisurely drinking tea, looking absolutely satisfied. "How long are you going to stay?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. Sarah shrugged, took a lazy sip, and casually waved her hand. "Mark is waiting for me at home. We just came for a little vacation." Mark, her rich husband, the one who, according to the stories, controlled all their money so strictly that Sarah could not even afford to pay off the loan that their parents had taken out for her wedding, now remained somewhere on the sidelines, far away, while she, having easily thrown herself off the whole past, once again took a central place in the family's life, as if there had been no break, as if these 5 years of absence and silence had meant absolutely nothing. The same parents who, when I called them late at night, trying to make sure they had something to live on, sounded tired and devastated, now behaved as if Sarah had returned with a triumph worthy of a heroine, as if her return was not a reminder of the mistakes of the past, but a long-awaited reunion, which they'd been dreaming all these years. As I was driving back to my apartment that evening, thinking about all this, my phone vibrated, and I glanced at the screen and saw a message from my mom. "Sarah sent us photos of her beautiful house. You should see their kitchen, it's great." I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, feeling a dull rage boil up inside me. Great cuisine. Maybe she could sell this magnificent house and finally return to her parents the money they spent on her marriage, which now, apparently, she talked about as casually as about a short vacation. But I didn't say anything. I've always been silent. The next 2 weeks brought with them an avalanche of calls from my mom, and each conversation was like a sharp blade stabbing into my mind, each time a little deeper. Sarah bought new furniture for her living room. Sarah enrolled her children in an elite kindergarten. Sarah sent me pictures of her new dress. Isn't it beautiful? Sarah. 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 The daughter who left them suddenly became the center of every story, the star of every conversation, while I, the one who supported them all the time, who provided them with stability, suddenly turned into someone secondary, insignificant, barely worth mentioning. When I arrived at my parents' house the following weekend, I felt that something was wrong even before I opened the door. Mom and Dad's cars were in their usual places, but no one came out to greet me as before. There was a strange, unnatural silence in the air, and when I entered the house, I saw a picture that only increased my anxiety. My parents were sitting in the living room, their faces tense, worried. They did not even try to hide the anxiety frozen in their gazes. "What happened?" I asked, carefully placing my purse on the dresser, feeling a heavy lump building in my chest. Mom barely looked at me, and then, with some strange caution, she said, "Sarah and the kids will be here soon. They will stay for a few days. We need to get the house ready." I forced myself to take a deep breath, trying to stay calm despite the storm of emotions raging inside. "Okay, but please don't touch my room. I need somewhere to stay when I arrive," I said, looking at my mom carefully. "Promise me you won't give up my room." Mom smiled, making the sign of the cross, as if confirming the sincerity of her words. "Of course not, honey," she replied, nodding. "I promise." The next 2 months flew by in a blur. I was completely absorbed in my work. I was assigned a large project that required maximum concentration. I spent long hours working on documents, received praise from my superiors, earned the respect of my colleagues, but I had almost no time left for trips home. Even our phone conversations with my mom became shorter and more distant. She seemed distracted, busy, although later I found out what her busy meant. Finally, when the project was successfully completed, and the management expressed gratitude by writing me a nice bonus, I decided to surprise my parents and spend time with them, which we had missed for so long. I spared no expense by choosing really worthwhile gifts for them. I bought an expensive coffee machine for Mom, which she always dreamed of, and a premium set of tools for Dad, which he loved so much. After 2 months of absence, I was really looking forward to this trip, hoping that everything would return to its place, that I would feel like a part of the family again. But as soon as I crossed the threshold of my parents' house that evening, I realized that something was terribly wrong. Toys were scattered everywhere, the same toys I'd seen Sarah's children wear last time, and there was a smell of something unfamiliar in the air. And when Mom turned to me, her face was tense, almost pale, and her words hit me like a sharp slap in the face. "Sophia, what are you doing here?" I froze, clutching the gift bags tighter in my hands, looking at her in confusion. "I came to visit, just like I have for the last 5 years," I said slowly, as if I had to explain something obvious. Mom hesitated, her hands nervously clenched on her apron. "We weren't expecting you." Before I could say anything, Sarah came out of the kitchen, her face alight with triumph, and a barely concealed mockery danced in her eyes. "Oh, and I thought you were already used to the fact that no one was waiting for you," she said with mock regret, grinning while I handed my parents their gifts. When they nodded gratefully, Sarah rolled her eyes, folding her arms over her chest. "You're always trying to show off, aren't you, Sophia?" I ignored her, took a deep breath, trying to keep my composure, and, looking at her directly, asked with cold detachment, "When are you coming home, Sarah?" She grinned. "I'm not Mark, and I'm divorced." "This is my home now," Sarah said calmly, almost with lazy carelessness, stretching her lips into a satisfied smile, as if she had just reported something completely insignificant, not worth attention, carrying nothing more than simple household news. The coffee machine, which I was still holding in my hands, almost slipped out of my fingers. Divorced. It means that the perfect marriage for which our parents drove themselves into debt, for which I supported them all these years so that they could cope with loan payments, collapsed, and now Sarah just returned home, as if it were a matter of course, as if she was welcome here with open arms, as if none of this mattered. But the worst was yet to come. After dinner, feeling tired and wanting to be alone, I headed to my room, hoping for at least a few hours of privacy, but as soon as I reached the stairs, my mother's nervous voice stopped me. "Dear, about your room." I froze, feeling an unpleasant chill run down my spine. "We gave it to Sarah." Mom quickly looked down, avoiding eye contact with me, and then, as if trying to smooth over the news, she added, "and her old room was converted into a nursery for toddlers." The world seemed to have turned on its axis. "You promised," my voice sounded hoarse, almost a whisper. "You swore you wouldn't touch my room." "Oh, don't be so dramatic," my father interjected, his tone irritated, as if my outrage was an empty whim, not worth paying attention to. "We've cleared the storage room for you." They put a bed and a couple of shelves there. The storage room. They moved me into a tiny, dark space where old boxes and seasonal clothes used to be stored in order to give up my room to my sister, the same sister who abandoned them, leaving them with debts they were still paying off, the one whose irresponsibility I compensated for all these years by sending them money so they could live without fear of bills and creditors. The storeroom? I repeated slowly, hardly believing my ears. "Are you moving me into the storeroom even though I've been paying your bills for 5 years?" I turned to my sister, barely able to contain my anger. "And what about work, Sarah? How are you going to contribute to household expenses?" But she was just idly examining her nails, sitting comfortably on what had once been my bed. "I don't have to work," she shrugged, not the least bit embarrassed. "Mark pays good alimony, which is enough for me and the children." "What about Mom and Dad's expenses?" I didn't take my eyes off her. "Have you ever thought about how much it will cost to keep 3 more people in this house? Utility bills, groceries, the loan they're still paying for your wedding?" "Oh, it's not difficult for Mom and Dad to cover these expenses," she shrugged again, as if she were talking about something insignificant. I turned sharply to my parents, and my heart sank from what I saw. They nodded, agreed, like obedient dummies on the dashboard. They don't mind, I said slowly, bitterly, feeling sick. Of course, they don't mind, because I regularly send them $1,500 every month. My voice was quiet, but steeped in icy awareness. I supported my parents, but now my money seemed to have to support Sarah as well. That's enough, Sophia, the father frowned irritably. You're selfish and arrogant. The storage room is quite a decent place for your visits. Selfish. I, who had been keeping them afloat for 5 years, who had denied myself vacations, entertainment, and sometimes even simple pleasures in order to provide them with financial stability every month, was now selfish. I laughed bitterly, but there was no humor in it. Am I being selfish? I repeated slowly, looking directly at my father, and then pointed at Sarah. Am I being selfish for helping you all this time while she, your precious daughter, disappeared for 5 years, leaving you with debts? We're tired of your tantrums, Mom interrupted me sharply, and there was no longer any trace of the tenderness in her voice with which she had spoken to Sarah. If you don't like the situation so much, maybe you should leave. And then I saw it, Sarah's smug smile, the corners of her lips twitching as she watched me with a slight, almost imperceptible triumph. That was the last straw. I looked at their faces, at my father's stern disapproval, at my mother rejecting me, at my sister basking in her triumph, and something inside me finally broke. Without saying another word, I turned around and left. Not just out of the room. Not just from home. From their lives. They didn't try to stop me. When I returned to my apartment, loneliness fell on me with unbearable weight. I silently opened a bottle of wine, poured myself a glass, sat on the sofa and took out my phone, launching the banking application. The planned monthly transfer to my parents' account was displayed on the screen. $1,500, which were supposed to be transferred in 3 days. I looked at these numbers, and the moments of all these years came back to my mind, every sacrifice of my desires, every endless conversation in which Sarah was more important than me, every birthday forgotten by parents because they were too busy admiring their eldest daughter. My finger hovered over the cancel button. I'd been responsible all these years. I was a good daughter. I helped without complaining. And what did I get in return? A storage room for sleeping. And the family that preferred the daughter that abandoned them. I took another slow sip of wine, feeling the astringency of the drink spread across my tongue, mixing with the bitterness of realization. Memories surfaced in my head, all those moments when I clenched my jaw, when I bit my tongue, suppressing the desire to tell the truth, when I listened to stories about how wonderful Sarah was living while she lived in her spacious house, posting pictures of expensive restaurants, trendy resorts, endless shopping on social networks, walking, and at the same time, I was sending money to my parents so that they could pay bills, buy groceries, and live another month without fear of calls from the bank. All those years when my fears were met only with irritated disregard, when my warnings about the consequences of their financial carelessness were smashed against the wall of blind devotion to the eldest daughter, who was always allowed everything. But now the choice was clear. With a decisive push, I canceled the planned transfer. Let Sarah help them now, let her deal with the bills, let her face the reality that she has been running from for so long, let her feel the responsibility that I am tired of. I was no longer the family ATM. A month has passed, full of silence. Not a single call from her mom, not a single text with enthusiastic stories about Sarah's latest purchases, not a single mention of the wonderful antics of her children, not even the usual evasive phrases from her father. It felt like I'd just been cut out of their lives, just like I'd cut them off my commitment list. I threw myself into my work, trying to fill the void inside with something constructive, something that would not allow my thoughts to return to the past, but I couldn't completely disconnect. Social media became a window into their world, a window that for some reason I couldn't close, no matter how painful it was. Mom's Facebook page was full of photos. Sarah and Mom are baking cookies in the new kitchen, beaming at the camera as if nothing has changed. Sarah and Dad in the park with the kids, laughter on their faces, as if the past years didn't exist. Happy family moments, from which I was deleted, just as I deleted my translations. Each new post felt like turning a knife into an already healed wound, but I forced myself to watch because I needed a reminder of why I made this decision, why I was no longer going to be a person who is used when it's convenient and then forgotten when it's no longer there. Needs. And that's when the bell rang. I knew it would come sooner or later. Why didn't the money arrive? Mom's voice was harsh, demanding, accusing, and there wasn't even a greeting or a hint of concern about how I was doing. I kept my voice steady. I canceled the transfers. The silence on the other end of the line lasted so long that I almost thought she had hung up, but then her voice cut through the air, full of indignation and rage. I canceled them, I repeated calmly. I'm not going to help anymore. You can't do this. Mom's voice rose to an almost hysterical scream. We need this money. How can you be so selfish? I almost laughed. Selfish? I echoed, feeling tired, bitter anger rising inside me instead of the usual guilt. I supported you for 5 years, while Sarah lived in her luxurious house, posting photos of her purchases on social media. Let her help you now. She has children to take care of. Mom was choking with indignation. So what? I wasn't going to be silent anymore. Do you think I don't deserve to be cared for? Do you think that all this time I didn't have my own needs? Mom's voice broke into a scream. You're an ungrateful little thing, after all we've done for you. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. And what exactly did you do for me, Mom? I felt a cold emptiness shrink inside me. They moved me into the storeroom. Have you taken out a loan for Sarah's wedding, which you are still paying off? Or maybe you're referring to the way you've been ignoring me for the last 5 years. If you didn't need the money, she began, but I interrupted her. It's not about money, Mom, and you know it. There was a tense silence on the other end of the line. You're just jealous of your sister, Mom finally exhaled, and now there was not only irritation in her voice, but also some kind of fatigue, as if she was sincerely convinced of her words. You've always envied her. Was I jealous? I repeated the word slowly, as if trying it out. Yes, you've always been like this, Sophia, Mom continued. Tough, embittered, unable to be happy for others. I froze, realizing that the conversation had reached the very point from which there was no turning back. Then we understood each other, I said coldly and hung up. My hands were shaking slightly, but not from guilt, as they used to. For the first time in years, I felt free. Text messages started almost immediately. The first, of course, was Sarah. You're jealous. You've always hated that Mom and Dad love me more. You're just mean and lonely. I deleted it without replying. My father's message was shorter. Your mother is crying because of you. I hope you're happy. Are you happy? Not quite. But I'm probably closer to this feeling than I have been in the last 5 years. Are you tired? Yes. I'm tired of being a backup. I'm tired of being remembered only when I need her. I'm tired of watching them prioritize Sarah, no matter how many times she lets them down. Other messages followed soon after. Each subsequent one was either more desperate or full of anger. I've read them all. But she didn't answer any of them. Now let them know what it's like to be ignored. A week later, my phone rang again, and when I looked at the screen, I saw a familiar number. Mom. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, allowing myself a moment of doubt before pressing the answer button. Hi, honey. Her voice sounded too soft, sickly sweet, as always when she tried to disguise a request for care. We miss you. Won't you come over for a visit? I grinned, not hiding my sarcasm. There was a short pause on the other end of the line, and then Mom said hurriedly, as if hoping it wouldn't sound as terrible as it really was. "We can make up the sofa." Her voice trailed off, became quieter, not more confident. "No, thanks." "Please, Sophia." Now her tone has changed. There is a pleading, plaintive note in it, which always pierced my feelings. "We are barely making ends meet. It's hard for us without your help. The bills are piling up." "It's not my problem anymore," I interrupted her, not allowing myself to fall back into my usual guilt. "You made your choice when you kicked me out of my house again for Sarah." There were sobs on the other end, and I rolled my eyes. The same tears, the same manipulations, the same performance that she played out every time she wanted to force me to do what she needed. "You're so cruel, Sophia." Mom's voice was trembling. "We are your parents. We need your help." "Help with the bills? Or with the loan payments for Sarah's wedding?" I interrupted, grinning, even though my stomach was clenching with fatigue. "The wedding she forced on you and then disappeared without paying a cent. Why don't you ask her for help?" "She has children," Mom almost screamed, as if I had insulted her in the most terrible way. "She has alimony from Mark," I reminded him, not letting him confuse me. "She has enough for a beautiful life, for branded items, for everything she wants. But for some reason, there is not enough money to help her parents, who, by the way, have taken on her debt." "Do you know what that means, Mom? She's using you. She's using you again, and you're letting her do it." "It's not true," Mom shouted, her voice trembling again, but now with anger. "She's changed." I shook my head, even though I knew she couldn't see me. "No, Mom. She hasn't changed. But I've changed." I broke this vicious circle, and this time, forever. I hung up the phone again, but this time I didn't just end the conversation. I blocked her number. This time, I'm done with the guilt. We're done with manipulation. We ended what was a financial safety net for a family that treated me like an unwelcome guest. That evening, instead of sitting alone and wondering if I had done the right thing, I opened my laptop and started exploring housing options. All the money I sent to my parents every month could have been a decent down payment for my own home. It's time to invest in your future. It's time to invest this money in myself, not in those who didn't appreciate my sacrifices. A week later, I somehow managed to reach Sarah again from a different number, of course. "You're killing them, you know." Her voice was laced with accusation, but I could hear fear as well as anger in it. "They can barely afford groceries." Funny, I tilted my head, smiling, although the smile was more of an empty gesture. "Funny how that didn't bother you when you put your wedding loan on them. Or when you disappeared for 5 years, leaving them with this burden. That was different." She practically screamed. "Oh, right, of course," I nodded, even though she couldn't see it. "Because you had a problem with Mark, didn't you? And now you have alimony. Well, use them to help our parents. This is for me and my children." Her voice rose to a screech. "And their money was for you and your children too, right?" I tilted my head slightly, feeling the bitterness in my voice suddenly surprise even myself. "Like their house. Like my room." She paused, unable to immediately come up with an excuse. "Do you know what really kills them, Sarah?" My voice was lower, colder than I'd expected. "You." I paused, letting those words sink into her mind. "You've always been the cause of their problems, but you've never had to deal with it because I've always cleaned up after you. You're just jealous," she finally hissed, her voice filled with rage. "You've always been jealous of me because Mom and Dad love me more." I suddenly felt relieved. Because now I have no more doubts. I laughed. Sincerely, bitterly, but with a strange sense of freedom. "You're right, Sarah. They really love you more. They have always loved and will always love. I let that thought hang in the air. But love doesn't pay the bills. Was that my job? And I left. I hung up the phone and blocked her new number, just like the previous one. Let her figure out how to support herself. For once in my life. My phone rang again, but this time it wasn't someone from the family, but my real estate agent. Sophia, I have found the perfect apartment in your price range. I think you should watch it. I smiled. Sign me up for viewing. I realized that I felt lighter than I had ever felt in recent years, as if a huge weight that I had carried for so long that I had almost merged with it had finally dissipated, leaving behind a void, but not painful, but liberating, giving me the opportunity to breathe deeply. The burden of my family's expectations, their constant demands, their eternal favoritism, their conviction that I should always correct their mistakes and Sarah should just live the way she wanted, all this no longer had any power over me. I was no longer the one who was responsible for the well-being of everyone around me. I was no longer the second most important daughter, whose existence was noticed only when something was required of me. I was no longer the one who grabbed any crumbs of attention that I might have managed to get, like if it were a luxury, not a right. I was just me. And for the first time in my life, it was enough. But news travels fast, especially in families, even if you yourself are no longer a part of their discussions. One evening, my phone rang, and when I looked at the screen, I saw the name of my cousin Emma, whom I didn't talk to very often, but who was always the relative who knew everything about everyone. Sophia, she sounded uncertain, even cautious, as if she wasn't sure if she should call me at all. I thought you should know. I waited in silence, feeling a slight irritation rising inside. I had no doubt that it would be about my family again. Your mom tells everyone that you left them. Emma paused for a second, as if hoping I wouldn't get mad, and then added that you decided to punish them for helping Sarah in her time of need. I snorted, unable to contain my sneer. Help Sarah? I shook my head, even though I knew she couldn't see me. Is that what they call it now? They work 2 shifts, Emma continued, her voice a little quieter than before. Your father is exhausted. Sarah still doesn't work, she just spends alimony on shopping and fancy dinners with her friends. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. Emma, are you saying that my parents are basically raising her children while Sarah plays the victim again? She says she needs time to recover, Emma muttered uncertainly. It's the same old Sarah, just a new excuse. I opened my eyes and looked out the window of my apartment, watching the lights of the evening city reflected in the glass. You know what's funny? What? For 5 years, I sent them money every month. I came twice a month. I was there for every holiday, for every birthday, but as soon as Sarah returned, I immediately became disposable. I grinned, feeling less angry than exhausted. They literally put me in the closet, Emma. There was silence on the other end of the line, and then a quiet, barely audible voice rang out. I know. This is wrong. Yes, but that's not my problem anymore. After I hung up, I went back to my business and went to look at the apartment again. She was perfect. 2 bedrooms, a spacious and modern kitchen, a bright living room, a large balcony overlooking the park. But most importantly, she was mine. No family drama. No persuasion to move into the closet for someone else. There's no feeling that you're always a backup. That same evening, I proposed. The next day, somehow, my mother reached me again using my father's work phone. Your father's back pain has worsened again from all these shifts. Her voice was stern, strained, as if she was talking not to her daughter, but to a debtor who refuses to fulfill obligations. We really need your help, Sophia. What about Sarah's help? I didn't give myself the opportunity to relent, to stay in my usual role. Does she still go shopping while you and your father are working themselves to exhaustion? Mom's silence was enough of an answer. You know, I continued in a flat voice, I just made an offer to buy an apartment. The initial payment will be made from the same money that I sent you. I paused for her to realize this. The money you used to support Sarah and her children while you treated me like an unwelcome guest. How can you be so heartless? Mom's voice trembled, but now there was not only anger in it, but also something like despair. We are your parents. Yes, I agreed calmly. You're my parents. And Sarah is my sister. I let those words hang in the air. But I'm not going to be your family ATM anymore, as long as you treat me like I don't matter. Of course you matter. Mom spoke hurriedly, as if she was seizing the last opportunity to convince me. We love you. I closed my eyes before answering. No, Mom, my voice was soft, almost affectionate. You love what I can do for you. It's not the same thing. I heard her breathing hitch, and then the familiar sobs. But this time they didn't work. This time, I didn't feel guilty. I've developed an immunity. I have to go, I said, looking at my watch. I have an appointment with a real estate agent. An agent? Mom sobbed. Now there was something like fear in her voice. Please, Sophia, we can figure something out. We can put a Real bed for you in the living room when you arrive. I closed my eyes, exhaled, and said the only thing that needed to be said. Goodbye, Mom. I pressed the end of call button. My phone vibrated with a new message, and when I looked at the screen, I saw a short but meaningful notification from my real estate agent. Congratulations. The sellers have accepted your offer. I froze for a second, letting these words enter my mind, and suddenly I felt a strange, new feeling spread through my body: lightness, freedom, the realization that for the first time in my life I had done something exclusively for myself. I was going to become a homeowner. My own place, my own space, my own future. I looked around my apartment, where I had lived for the past few years, but now I seemed to see it in a different light, not as a house, but as a temporary shelter, a place where I spent too little time, because every second weekend I spent at my parents' house, trying to be a good daughter, trying to earn the attention that I was given only when something was required of me. I thought about all those years, about the money I hadn't saved up because I was spending it on paying my parents' bills, about how I was putting my own life on hold to be their backup plan, their safety net, their resource to use. But time has an amazing ability to put everything in its place. From the balcony of my new apartment, I now see the city in all its glory, the lights of the evening streets, endless traffic, flickering advertising signs reflected in the windows of neighboring houses, a view that I would never have had if I had continued to send my money to a house where I was not even considered part of the family. I haven't been useful to them yet. Mortgage payments are now completely manageable, and for the first time in my adult life, I feel like I'm investing in my future rather than paying for the mistakes of my sister's past. Emma keeps me updated on family news, even though I never ask. Sarah still lives with our parents, still spends her alimony on designer clothes, expensive beauty treatments, spa days, and trendy restaurants, occasionally throwing small amounts at her children's expenses, but in fact my parents are no longer just helping her. They have fully assumed the role of those who provide her family. Mom and Dad are working overtime. Their faces have become more tense, tired, and the wrinkles on their foreheads have deepened, but it was their choice. This was supposed to be a time when they could finally relax and enjoy life, but instead they are still carrying an adult daughter who has never learned to be responsible for her actions. I heard that they finally paid off that wedding loan, the debt that started all this chaos, the debt that was supposed to lead to a happy marriage that didn't last. The irony did not escape me. Mom once told Aunt Jaylee that now they can finally breathe easier, but almost immediately complained that her ungrateful younger daughter had abandoned them in a difficult moment. Emma once told me. On Sunday, Mom showed everyone photos of Sarah and the children at a family dinner. She kept saying, "At least one of my daughters is still taking care of the family." I just smiled. How nice of her. Do you want to tell them about your new place? Emma asked cautiously. To show that everything is fine with you? No, I replied firmly. They can't be a part of it. They can't see what I've built for myself after trying to put me in a closet as a reminder of my place in their lives. I haven't given my new address to anyone and I don't plan to change it. I can easily imagine their reaction, my mother's thinly veiled criticism that I probably now consider myself better than everyone else, my father's frown, which would mean only one thing, disappointment, Sarah's jealous comments that I brag and think only of myself. They would definitely have found a way to make my success a part of their story, to make it something that I should direct to the benefit of the family, instead of enjoying the fact that I finally built my life the way I want. But I don't care what they say anymore. Let them discuss me over Sunday dinners. Let them complain to their relatives about how cruel and selfish I am. Let them say that I left them because I did not want to continue paying for their unreasonable decisions. Let Sarah play her role as a poor divorced mother. Let my parents continue to work extra shifts while she lives with them, instead of taking care of themselves on their own. Sometimes, sitting on the balcony with a glass of wine, watching the sun set over the horizon, flooding the city with warm golden light, I remember the very storeroom they wanted to move me into. And I understand that this was their last gift to me. The kick I needed so badly. The push to finally be free. And stop fighting for the crumbs of their attention, giving them everything I had,